and Sandbox. I actually do some research on Sandbox, and Sandbox looks like it's more of a complete game than Decentraland.
Right.
But both aren't really good games. Like they don't. Decentraland in particular, it doesn't like really have any sort of. It doesn't have much interactivity. The performance is really bad. Sandbox has a really nice voxel building system. Like I'm really
Mm.
impressed by their editor. But the game itself is kind of like, like why would I?
What makes it? What makes it a bad game to you? Like you're looking at it and you're saying it lacks this. What makes it bad?
I mean, like first of all, a solid gameplay loop. Like both of these games, actually, the one of the YouTube viewers I watched is like the whole point of these NFT crypto based games is to turn your spare time into making money.
Hmm.
So it's not really a game. It's sort of like a glorified casino or labor camp because all you're doing is, like the review I saw is they went to one space in Sandbox and
Yeah.
it was the most populated space, but literally all it was people clicking to mine virtual rocks so they could get the currency, which presumably they would then want to turn into real US dollars. So like the Web3 crypto, and I think crypto really like because metaverse was so vaguely defined by Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
crypto just saw it was like blah, and then like now metaverse is crypto. Um, but as you've seen, crypto's like really just falling. People are like realizing the NFTs aren't worth anything, at least in my opinion. And then that sort of thing. So like what I would say makes a solid game is like there's tons of literature out there on like game design, like solid gameplay loop. You want to make the interface usable. You want to
Mm.
have like really responsive, like good game feel. Like when you do an animation, is it like one of the things? So like here's a fun thing to think about is like when you do Call of Duty or any sort of shooter game, right? Or when you shoot the gun, you're kind of like, oh, okay, like I shoot the gun, bang, and the gun kind of recoils and stuff, and
Yeah.
then it kills whatever. And there's a big thing in the FPS community for like the shooting, the feel of shooting. And the thing is that itself is made up of several subcomponents. Like, yeah, you click on something and how fast does it die? That's part of it, but that's really not what makes it feel good to play. What makes it feel good is like how beefy is the sound? What do the animations look like? And actually those two are the biggest, like two of the biggest things when you like that recoil animation does so much for how the gun actually feels to shoot. And so
And
games like
you don't think we can achieve that in the VR
Decentraland,
spaces? Yeah.
no, you definitely can. Like there's tons of shooter games out there, and that's why I think this is important to separate VR from this concept of the metaverse that was pitched by Zuckerberg, because
Mm.
like I think the way we will get the most out of this technology and what we want to do with it is by kind of going like, I mean, in my opinion, separating the metaverse a little bit from what we actually want to do. Like, what do you want to do with VR? Or actually, let's talk about like your project, your organization. You want to use VR and these immersive virtual spaces, and correct me if I'm wrong, like educate people, make things
Yeah.
interesting that they might otherwise like be like, whatever. That doesn't require like a massively multiplayer vast network system where you're supposed to be able to jump into any other version of games and stuff like that. Like that is just a compelling contained experience with
Yeah.
multiplayer. And
Shout
so
shout out shout out to Youth Can Do IT.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. So like Youth Can Do It is a great example of like, all right, let's take this technology and let's apply it to a real world use case. Um, I think that like in before Zuckerberg said metaverse is a thing, you would have what you're doing would have been called just like
Yeah.
maybe like an online classroom or experience or multiplayer game.
Right.
Now it's being called a metaverse because it's online in 3D, and it's still the same thing. And actually, a lot of game developers are like, "Hey, we did all of this already. You're kind of just reinventing it." So
Hmm.
like I'm not saying this to be negative on like people that are using this space to do things. I'm more negatively casting light on just the concept of like this metaverse as proposed.
Yeah.
Because from the get go too, it's frankly it's pretty unworkable. But I think I've ranted enough. So if you want to jump in,
No, I mean, I like the points that you raised. And one thing that I will say is I had a discussion with somebody earlier today about the metaverse as a concept. And like what you're mentioning, they shared that this whole concept of Meta turning into the owner of the metaverse is something that's concerning to them. Owning the term and owning the concept of a metaverse,
Mhm.
because then it ties all of this digital experience that people are having to one company. And he even mentioned to me, boy, even the word meta, because my blog is called In the Meta Space. He's like, wow, you tied yourself to that. And I'm like, it kind of can be a gamble. Um, but you touched on something big. You said crypto is not all it was cracked up to be.
Oh
And I
gosh.
am with you on that. I mean, crypto has had a rise and a fall and a rise and a fall last year.
Hmm.
And going into this year, it's been fluctuating still. And one of the things that I find interesting about the concept of the metaverse is among all the different descriptions or definitions for it, there are two camps. There's either the metaverse is tied to the concept of the blockchain and therefore is also related to NFTs. It's also related to trade via crypto exchanges, as well as blockchain based currencies like Ethereum.
Hmm.
Or the metaverse is separate. So the concept of the metaverse is just about that digital interaction, that experience where you are an avatar that's interacting with an environment. You have an online interaction. So it's not about an in person. You can't be in person and in the metaverse. And they say that that's what makes it a metaverse, not blockchain and NFTs. Where do you stand on that definition? Is it tied directly to crypto and Web3, or is it something separate?
Uh, if I believed in something called the metaverse, I'd say it's completely different from cryptos and NFTs. And
Mm,
like one of the things, I just want to throw this out there. A lot of crypto enthusiasts say like, oh, we're still in the early days. Metaverse, like crypto adoption is gonna like come any day now because it's early in the technology. Crypto's been around since like '08, like
mm,
2010. It's old, like, and it's inefficient and it doesn't work. It's
yeah.
not gonna like the concept, which is basically let's build a new financial system, which kind of dovetails into let's build a better economy.
Right.
Great, all for that. But be really like cautious of anybody that's trying to sell you a new financial system that they've already invested a ton of money into because like
Mm,
their motives aren't pure, of course.
mm. I like that. I like that. That's a good warning for anybody watching and listening. Now, we've touched on all the foundation information, like the fundamentals. Let's jump into this concept of digital twins. It's something that I knew the concept of, but you're really the one who introduced me to the term. So why don't you take us through what a digital twin is?
Sure. So it's basically a digital copy of a physical object or system that ages and changes with that system, and basically provides like an up to the minute, um, ideally up to the minute sort of view of what's happening in that system. So to kind of like bludgeon an analogy into this, when NASA sends their probes to Mars, they actually build two of them and they keep one on Earth so that they can, if something goes wrong on Mars, they can troubleshoot it on the one that they have on Earth. Now, if you
Mm,
took that same concept and you said, oh, this one on Earth is actually just a computer model, then that's a digital twin. Essentially, it's like you can perform experiments on it to see how the real one would actually, respond under that sort of load. You can like kind of see in a virtual environment, for example, in real time what's happening with the real thing. So if you like
yeah.
a hydroponics farm, you could walk virtually through it and see all the plant data and stuff like that.
Mm,
So yeah, it's a digital replica of a real object or system.
okay. So why then is it a growing concept? Like, what is the value that you're seeing in industry? If you can give some examples as well.
Sure. So like there's a couple of, I'm gonna not remember the names, and then some of the
That's
names
cool.
I'm not gonna be able to say. But there's like some shipping companies that are building or have like experimented with the concept of the digital twin for kind of keeping track of autonomous cargo ships. There's digital twins of like bridges and other infrastructure projects. So those buildings have sensors embedded in them that update that data live. I've worked on projects with like wind turbines, actually a spaceship company, and some other companies that I don't think I can even say what they do,
Right.
that all take that data and kind of like keep track of it and that sort of thing. One of the startups I worked with a friend was basically for vehicles, for like autonomous vehicles. You would keep this digital twin of every autonomous vehicle in your fleet, so that
Mm.
you could always see like, oh, this part is one of the ways that one of the things we were pitching is, because we had up to the minute data on what was
Yeah.
happening in the vehicle, we could like run a stress simulation, or we could see the degradation of performance. So let's say, oh, we're watching this vehicle and we've noticed that every time it goes over a bump, the suspension like keeps kind of getting more and more squished. And so we can infer from that data, like, hey, maybe the suspension spring is
Wow.
failing or something like that.
Wow.
It's cool stuff. And I think one of the big reasons it's coming out now more so is because, one, awareness of it is becoming bigger, right? Two, the technology is like more capable of it. Like we have faster processors, better sensors, stuff like that. And then three, I think like companies are just trying to cut more costs and stuff like that. But I will say, I haven't seen as much. It's like VR. I haven't seen as much uptick as you think there would be. Like I think maybe Caterpillar does it, but like I can think of one really good example would be like these giant mining trucks and stuff would have this sort of thing, and I don't think it's a standard piece of equipment. So yeah,
So I'm gonna ask on behalf of the thought that might have passed somebody's mind while listening to that. You know those 3D renders of future real estate properties that you see? Would that be considered a digital twin, even though the property doesn't exist, but you can see like where the security cameras would be, where the carport would be? Would that fall under digital twins?
I mean, I would answer that question with a question and be like, does the 3D model of, I don't know, does the 3D model that was used to produce this Xbox controller, is that a digital twin? Like, I would say, Sorry,
I don't know the answer. I definitely don't know the answer. That's why you're here.
Well, okay, in my opinion, I would say no, only because we've defined that already. That is defined as like, that's a CAD model.
Right.
So that I think already has a definition of being something separate than a digital twin. Because if we say, oh, well, it's like, actually, you know what a better example would be? Would you call the blueprints for a building a digital twin? Right? Like, even though they're computerized or whatever, it's still just a blueprint drawing. It's not the actual object. I think by merging those two definitions, you're kind of diluting both of them.
I like that. That's clear. You can see the difference immediately. That's a good analogy. That was a very good analogy. All right.
I can help with that.
So there's a video that I saw a little bit earlier that I wanted to just share. It's from Meta. It's specific to the power of the metaverse. And I just want to put it up on the screen and we can just take a look at it right now, just to see what it actually looks like. So let me pull that up.
Sure.
Okay, making sure you can hear the sound. So I'm going to play it. If it doesn't have the sound, then I'll just cut this clip of us talking.
We'll just, talk over it.
Oh,
I can already see where this is going.
Some
it's an
people
AR.
say the metaverse will only be virtual. But firefighters entering a burning house will one day save time when lives are on the line. Visualizing a patient's most recent scan will help speed up decision-making in the ER. And while the woolly mammoth is still extinct, that doesn't mean students can't take field trips to visit them. The metaverse may be virtual, but the impact will be real. Some people say...
Yeah, that's cool.
I think it's cool too. And, marketing-wise, it captures the heart for sure, because they spent their money quite clearly to
Yeah.
get all of that ready. But we're looking at that and we're seeing that it really is pushing VR. It's pushing virtual reality as a way to interact with things in
Point
the
of order.
past.
It's actually technically pushing XR, extended
X-
reality, because it's
okay.
AR and VR.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So it's pushing both of them then.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that. And we see that, you know, that would be an ideal thing. Imagine you could just give the headset to your nephew, your niece, your child, and you say, you know, you've never seen a woolly mammoth in real life, but here is not just a model or something that you can play with like a toy, but something you can walk around, you can poke it and it will jump. This is I'd say the fantasized version of the metaverse and VR and where VR is going. But I want to know from you, is this where you see, just from what the work that you've been doing, where you see VR is actually going, like the trajectory is going on right now?
Good question. I do have I actually, though, before I answer that, because this is actually a really good lead-in from this, what's the word? Diluting terms.
Yeah.
Because what we just saw was XR technology. You saw augmented reality and you saw virtual reality. Those don't need any sort of weird connectivity. That's just two pieces of hardware technology with some software attached. That's not a metaverse as defined by Zuckerberg as a sort of like, even by their own definition, it's not the same thing. And so that's why at the beginning of this call, we discussed, like, all right, let's make sure we separate out this concept into different things. There's XR, there's social VR, and then whatever I think the other one was, but I can definitely throw crypto in there now. So, like, there's these three separate things. It's really important that we kind of define, we understand what we're looking at, because I'm thinking a lot of all right, so your question, where do I see, is this where I see VR and stuff going? Yeah, I mean, yes, but those firefighters, for example, like, how many departments in even the US, which is, you know, supposedly like a really rich country, how many of them do you think have funding for like $1,000 like head thing? Right?
That's a good point, because even the HoloLens was $2,500, and it's, I mean, Microsoft is not investing in it like it was before. People are being laid off in that department, so
they actually can the whole department, right? So, like,
there you go.
And Magic Leap never really got that Magic Leap. So, like, yeah, sorry. The technology is possible. Whether, and there's a really good quote that I remember, like, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So, like, that technology can exist, but is it going to be widespread enough for it to actually be something that is like a factor? And for some of those use cases, I would say no. I would say, like, the firefighters, it would be great. I could see that being deployed in some, like, very large, very well-funded departments. Not too many of them, but I could see it happening. The medical thing, same idea. Like, I know they're not going to get that technology in St. Croix. Like, they just rebuilt their hospital last year. So, like, that's not going to happen. The VR thing, I think, is more accessible. I'm actually working on a school project right now, where, like, trying to get students to, like, see, you know, VR and stuff like that. So I think that's possible. But then you come into, all right, well, not every single, but so many schools in the United States alone are way underfunded. In fact, we have a massive teacher shortage because people aren't being paid enough to stay in the profession. We're not going to get these just headsets kind of thrown into every school. So, like, a lot of these sort of Silicon Valley tech dreams are really built in a bubble, and the problems that they're solving are problems that you would only try and solve when you solved everything else, and we're nowhere close to solving those other things. So, like, go ahead.
So I'm gonna peg on that, because that takes us to what we want to discuss. You're talking about some of the obstacles. Price is an obstacle. Making sure that it's actually distributed evenly is going to be an obstacle, because some of this will be available based on where you live as well. Like, this is not just, it's not just price prohibitive, you know, it's things like shipping prohibitive. And we're not forgetting that the Oculus Quest isn't the only headset. There are headsets popping up all over the world. Pico is popping up with their headset. Vario has their very expensive headset.
Sorry, I actually just saw Pico laid off like half their staff.
Wow.
Yeah, something
Breaking
crazy.
news. Oh my goodness. And Pico
Yeah.
was supposed to be the MetaQuest big competitor, and their headsets look great. The 4 looks fantastic, but
Yeah.
it's about access to it. Access to it is one of the big obstacles. I like what you said. Hit me with some other obstacles. Like, is this gonna, be something that we need to consider? What else do we need to consider besides just price and access? And I want to know about that school project as well, if you can share.
Sure. I'd actually love to, because maybe we can work together on it. The other thing would be content. Like, now that AI is becoming a thing, like, this might become less of a problem in the future. I mean, it's going to create more problems, like if artists out of work, which is bad enough already. It's only going to make that worse. As an artist / designer, like, I'm a little bitter about how art is treated in society. It's very undervalued. So now we have AI. Sorry, I'm starting to rant.
Talk about it.
Well, so, like, it's just, why is the first thing that Silicon Valley sort of, like, programmer types is inventing is art? Like, why are we replacing that with AI? Like, why not, automate, like, recycling robots, or just, like, anything else other than, like, the things that make humans human? It's just really weird that that's what we're starting with.
That's interesting.
But, like, outside of that, I guess, the content creation, that's a problem. Like, excuse me, like, for instance, Meta's thing right there. Oh, all these schools are going to see woolly mammoth. Well, who's going to make the woolly mammoth? Who's going to build that program? Who's going to, like, manage that school software? Like, all of that stuff is there. So you need that content. I think interactivity is another one. So, like, I would pitch that, like, okay, well, you could really get around the availability issue by having, like, just phone VR. Like, that has some drawbacks. It's not 6 degrees of freedom, but, you could do that. Problem is interactivity. You don't have any just standalone controllers. So, like, are you going to be locked into only buying Quests? Because no school system is going to be able to afford 10, $5,000 borrowed headsets.
Yeah, no.
So it's going to be the Quest. So are they going to be locked into only that, or are we going to figure out a different way? So that's another issue. So yeah, I mean, really though, it's not. Oh, and then the other big thing is, like, just what VR is. You put on goggles, you're shut off from the world. It's a little disorienting. There's actually another bit of another obstacle would be VR sickness, motion sickness from using it. Some people can't. I personally,
is that a big thing though?
It's just like one of those things that's always, like, waiting in the periphery. Like, for instance, I just did a project where we deployed it, and the people who tried it, they loved it, but then, like, half of them were, like, vomiting because they just couldn't deal with, like, how to move around. Yeah, and it's just, like, it's one of those, like, human factors things. By the way, guys, industrial design term, human factors is the study of man interfacing with machine. It originally started in World War II when they had to figure out how to lay out fighter plane cockpits so that pilots, or not just fighter planes, but so that pilots would be able to reach switches, like, really quickly in, like, the heat of combat. That's human factors, like, laying it out. Now, human factors in VR is, does this make you vomit? Like, can we reduce the amount of nausea? How do the controls feel in your hand? That sort of thing.
Nice.
I'm a geek for design stuff, but so anyway, so yeah, so I would say, like, cost, availability, VR sensory, like, adjustments, and then content creation, and then what was the other thing I said? Just the fact that it blocks you off from the real world. I mean, everybody, I think, knows that AR is going to be, like, what this. Everyone's targeting AR glasses. Like, that is the technological, like, next level for this sort of technology. And I think AR is, like, definitely probably better than VR for, like, classroom or even maybe at-home gaming, depending on how it's implemented, because you can still use it. It's like VR, but you can see the rest of the world, so you're not shut off from it. Yeah.
That's a big one. And I mean, we can see that it may not be in your head, but Pokemon Go blew up when people thought Pokemon was done.
Yeah.
And that was
now Niantic is, like,
huge. And it was a global phenomenon. Like, it wasn't limited to any specific country. There were people in Jamaica who were walking around the parks like picking up Pokeballs. Now I wasn't one of them, disclaimer, but I did see like this was a thing. People were walking around going to parks looking for the Pokeball. And one of the things that made Niantic so successful was that all you needed for Pokemon Go was your phone.
Yes.
That was it. And
Yeah.
so it goes right back to what you're talking about in terms of not just accessibility, but who's building the headsets and who's building the models that people are going to interact with. Because if you have no content, it's like loading up a fantastic MacBook but having a terrible operating system. That wouldn't be the experience. You have the specs, but you don't have the software. It's an empty experience.
You know what actually just occurred to me, going back to like the very beginning, like the whole metaverse discussion. Like I said, like all of this stuff is going towards just game creators. So if you were able to like take those game creators, make them easy enough to use so that I don't like really need to get into it to learn how to use it, maybe you might at least help that content issue. But yeah, content's hard. And actually, we could jump into the school thing because like I have like a segue into that. One of the other big issues with like VR in schools is teachers are already overworked, underpaid. They don't have time to learn how to build a VR environment and then learn how to set up the headsets and give it to the students. So that's also a big issue just with schools in particular. So the thing I'm doing now, I'm working, I got introduced to a school in California that it's like a middle school. And the idea here, I wrote an article about it. If you want to check it out, elevance.design/blog.
We'll add that link.
Sweet, thank you. But basically, the article sort of posited this future where schools, because of decaying social structures, etc., schools got less and less funding. So the schools that got underfunded had to like kind of share their resources with schools that were still able to keep their buildings and their funding. And I actually kind of see that as potentially a positive thing because you can have these schools develop into sort of like a global school where you can learn. It's like split up. So you would learn remotely for some things, and your class might include people from Jamaica or from China or Japan or anywhere, right? But then you would have like an in-person class where you might do like shop or debate or something like that, like things that you want that in person for.
Yeah.
Because students need interactivity, like human interaction. So the project I'm doing with them is basically trying to create. Actually, let me grab the email because it's just going to be easier than trying to just whip it off the top of my head.
No, I'm already excited. My whole demeanor changed.
Yours did or mine did? I didn't understand what you said.
No, my whole demeanor changed. Like my mind went, wow, this sounds excellent. Especially the debate, because debate is something that I know of organizations in Jamaica that they're doing it over Zoom because of COVID. And a debate over Zoom doesn't work. There were situations where the Wi-Fi dropped, and so you had to scratch that. I'm imagining a debate that is more interactive, where 3 people are lined up next to each other in a huddle, having the discussion. That already got my mind saying this is something that I could see.
Cool. Well, then, let me know what comes to your mind when I kind of explain this. So basically, I'm just going to kind of read these summarized paragraphs. Sure. In this future world, global schools operated as a hybrid of remote and in-person classes, focusing on creating communities of students. They have fewer classrooms and focus more on shared equipment and real-world exploration. So the idea there is like you would go to the school not to go sit in a classroom, but to use whatever tools they had there. And when you're at home, your assignments would be based more around, find out about the world around where you live. So instead of traditional classes, students might have like those shop classes or in person. So students can learn from teachers anywhere in the world through video conferencing or XR technology. But every student has a nearby access to a school or a library where they can meet from other classmates, from their local area or other classes with different schedules. So like the idea of school transforming from like kind of you sit down and you stare straight ahead and you listen to more of like actually like a hangout spot where students can go to spend their free time and maybe like mess around with stuff. And then, in-person learning is still valued. Students could like travel to other cities because they want to learn from a particular teacher in person. I think that would be really exciting. But the goal is generally to encourage this global understanding and peace through shared learning. So go ahead.
No, I'm reacting because I don't know if you know, I love education, but I'm also a technologist and a futurist. So I'm
Mhm.
seeing how this is actually a way that people can learn. It sounds exciting the way you've described it. In fact, I just saw a video about a company called Portal that's creating these physical like portals that you can stand at in special cities and you can wave at people in different countries. And what they're seeing in the videos is that people feel like we're not so different after all. We're right in front of each other,
That's
waving
cool.
from a different. I thought that was cool as well. So I'm hearing it in what you're describing.
I like that. So okay, so like challenge. So I discussed with the principal, some challenges. One of them is like distractions via TikTok or like literally anything else is generally more interesting than social studies or whatever. A need for students to have in-person interactions, despite as remote as you can get, you need this. And the need for moderation to prevent bullying and other toxic behavior. So some solutions that I'm going to be exploring with them, and maybe we could also, work with you guys to kind of like really push the idea of like an international system. Is like one, like limiting the experiences or the classes to like an hour or less so that students aren't as distracted. They can like just get it done and be done with it.
Yeah,
Also, maybe limiting the school day to only a couple hours per day rather than like a straight 8 or whatever it currently is. Um, Creating this hybrid school system and areas where students could go hang out in this safe place. Because like one of the other things is parents basically need schools to like take their kids while they go work. So
right.
if we maybe turned it into something more where they could just kind of be at that place and I don't know, they have a snack bar, whatever kids do these days. Like that might be more fun. And I know I just sounded probably older than I am, but the other big part of this, though, is like building a social network in a virtual world. So going to that kind of metaverse thing. Um, how do we make like a school and more importantly the network within that school more interesting than Instagram, TikTok, etc.? That's a tall
Well,
order because those applications are built to be addictive. So you need
yeah,
to like have really good content for that. And I also want to throw this out there to any younger users who are listening. The internet used to be much better. Like it wasn't just like 5 websites that had everything. Like there were hundreds, thousands of them. You would like bounce between them. Now it's basically just like Facebook, TikTok, and a couple of others. It's kind of sad. So hopefully, like this would maybe bring that back. And
mm,
then finally, using an AI system to monitor for that toxic behavior and then like flag it up the chain to a person to review. Because now I think like AI is at that point where you could kind of reasonably rely on it to pick up like some of these language issues.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's kind of like what I've been discussing with them, and we're gonna have a meeting next week. But like, what do you think about that? Like, where does your mind go?
Well, first off, that are you spearheading the idea? Is it your idea?
Yeah.
I like it. I like it, and I like how it brings in the different arms of technology, like the AI, to make sure that there is a safe space. Because one of the biggest issues with the whole concept of the metaverse, and I'm going to get back to describing your idea specifically,
Hmm.
but is that safety. If you join one of these online rooms in Oasis or VR chat, you're going to get verbal abuse and metaphysical abuse. I'm going to make that word up. And it is immediate. Like you join and you get some sort of negative experience because there's no real moderation and
Hmm.
anyone can be anyone. The benefit of these more closed spaces and more private spaces is that you can then set your rules for your community and find a way to enforce it, which is why I really like that AI idea. Um, I'm also I'm also liking that the globalness of that idea. How you can actually expand that very quickly of the
Yeah, I'm
specific
thinking like
school idea.
right, like this could go. Well, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead,
And
keep
in
going.
fact,
Sorry.
so and it lines up pretty interestingly with something that we're doing at Youth Can Do IT.
Hmm.
We are in discussions with one of the top universities in the UK. We've already signed that we're doing this project and we've already submitted it to the university and there's already approval. But what we're focusing on is world building, but also ethics in the metaverse. That's part of the focus. What does it look like to be interacting with others in a way that is reasonable and responsible? And then how do you protect yourself as a user in the metaverse, and we're focusing on kids from the ages of about 11 to maybe 16 or 14, and having them understand this is how you use the space safely. Just like we spent all these years teaching people to use the internet safely, well, we now have to teach them how to use this virtual world safely. Because if the internet was dangerous and had dangerous aspects to it, then this is just an extension of that. I mean, people also call the metaverse the spatial internet, which I love as someone in web development and software development. Spatial internet, like the internet you can walk through. I like that. And it's a very nice way of visualizing it. And I think it also needs to be something that persons are taught how to use, just like any other good technology.
For sure. Yeah, actually, to add to that point, I saw a statistic today that said 83% of women, female gamers, like people who play video games, received some sort of abuse online. And it was attached to an article where like 2 top male streamers used a voice changer to like appear as a woman, and they were like blown away by like the toxicity. So I think that in particular too is like once you get into this sort of voice chat where it's, you know, there's no repercussions, you can have these physical avatars that, you know, I don't know if you've seen VR chat, people go a little over the top with them.
Yeah.
No knocks to VR chat fans. But if you're a woman, especially on these platforms, it's like really heinous. Like I know a couple of my friends, they don't even turn on voice chat because they know as soon as they do, they're going to get bombarded with people. Like, how do you also tackle that issue? And I mean, I think there's like a whole rabbit hole that you can go down with, like, you know, how young
Absolutely.
men are being taught to like deal with this stuff, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that's another big thing we need to look at too.
Okay, making notes. Next talk. No, but
Okay,
that's also a big topic that I'd love to discuss. But just looking at what we've discussed today, because we have discussed a lot on topic, and I love that because it's been rich. You can watch this and learn a lot about design. You can learn a lot about what the metaverse is and what it isn't, as well as some of the things that are going to be hindrances to VR adoption and AR adoption and any other new R that we come up with in the future adoption across the world. I mean, you can watch this and also come up with business ideas. Now, I'm not saying I need credit. Not saying that at all if you're watching this, but if you see this 5 years in the future and you're like, wow, this is where I got my inspiration from, just drop a comment. Definitely would appreciate that. But Jordan, I also wanted to just touch on something that you specialize at, which is world building. You are a designer, as you mentioned, and a 3D designer. And we briefly looked at that video from Meta and the woolly mammoth. But what are some of the areas that you think we need to focus on? And when I say we, I mean all those who are interested in VR being adopted, specifically about world building. Like, is there a lack of focus on world building that's happening right now that's going to hamper the growth of VR in the future?
I mean, it's a good question. It's kind of hard to answer because these virtual spaces exist in some sort of context, and that context really defines it. So, like, for example, with Youth Can Do IT, it's on your website. It's related specifically to what you guys do. So the world that you're building for that kind of like has, you know, what it should be about. Whereas if like I'm building a game in Unreal Engine and I'm building a world there and it's like, I don't know, like really gritty, grim, dark future like Warhammer, and like that's a different kind of world building. So like I guess it's kind of hard. I don't know if I can answer just by saying like, you know, we need to focus on world building because, you know, depending on what you're building the world for is really going to define what you need to focus on. I think general rules that I've seen, like at least from the Mozilla Hub standpoint, from Decentraland, from all these like Web3 metaverse type things, is really like focusing on a reason for people to be there. Like a lot of them really kind of go to, all right, well, we have a place where people can join in 3D multiplayer.
Yeah. No, that's I get you. It's yeah. We need content. We need content that actually engages. It's not about just the space.
And not just that. You need content that engages and has a reason to be 3D. Like, you know, you as a web developer, like, it's way faster to scroll down a page and click a button and then you're taken to where you want to go than to like walk through a virtual building and like turn a corner and then find the thing and then click on that and then eventually you have to go there.
You
So
know,
like,
I'm gonna jump on that because that's a conversation I had last year with some IT professionals on a call in Barbados about the metaverse, and I was describing what it was and the concept, and that Snoop Dogg bought land, and that somebody bought a virtual plot of land next to him, and they raised a question that I think might actually be really good for you. They were asking, you know, what is the value of having a digital layout that matches like an island like Barbados, where you have property that's on a virtual hill that's more expensive and property that's in a virtual valley that's less expensive. When technically speaking, you can teleport between two different locations. I don't know if there's something you want to, or you'd be able to add to that. But the question that they had is there real value in mapping out exactly the same layout? And what is that value when you're really in a virtual world where you can teleport from one place to the next?
yeah, actually, that's a really good point. Like, frankly, there is none. Like, not in the sense that like, you
Nice
know, you
and
map
easy.
out,
Shoops.
just like you can map out a virtual world and there is a value there. Like if you wanted to display data on it that was like specific to certain locations on the island, or you know, you wanted to like recreate the island in particular and like, I don't know, do like a theoretical universe where it developed in a different direction and you want to use the same geography, like that all makes sense. But the concept of buying virtual land is such like an anachronism that we've brought from the real world, and just it's artificial scarcity that we've just taken from the real world and applied it to the virtual world. Second Life at least had a reason for doing it. Second Life virtual land, as I understand it, was basically just server. Like if you bought land, you're buying time, like processing time on a server, so that that server can dedicate that time to whatever experience you're building.
Gotcha.
If you're just putting like a square on a virtual map, like there literally is no value to that. And limiting the map itself is, if anything, making your product worse, because like now you're just limiting your potential user base to A, whoever can afford it, and B, whoever gets in early enough to still be able to snag a place. It just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, that was well answered. You gave the pros and the cons, and I think anyone watching would understand why. Like why yes or why no. So I only had one more question for you, and we have to touch on it because as much as we're talking about our augmented reality and virtual reality, we can't leave out artificial intelligence. ChatGPT has been everywhere.
Crazy.
And it is doing some amazing things. I've used it to write things from songs to code to documents. It's been amazing. What is the role that you think AI and machine learning might have in artificial, augmented reality and any digital twins and the metaverse overall?
Pattern recognition. So like if you wanted to do, you know, when you watch those sci-fi movies and the guy has like an AR, or woman, or they have an AR display and they're like looking at something and it like outlines the thing and starts like throwing a bunch of data on the screen. Like you would need AI to be able to process that image, find the object, separate it out from the environment, and then reference it to another item. Like you would need, so that's the first thing I would say. So AR, I would say any sort of like real world recognition, and more importantly, real world processing, like processing of real world data. I could see AI being really useful for that. Otherwise, content generation or like NPCs. I don't know if you've heard of this game called Mount and Blade Warband.
Not yet.
It's like a medieval, like I've never played it. As I understand it, it's kind of like a large scale medieval battle simulator plus like Grand Theft Auto plus like RPG sort of thing. But somebody modded the game. It's highly moddable. They injected ChatGPT into all the NPCs in the game. So you can walk to any NPC and have a full conversation with them. It's really cool. Like it's limited. Like the ChatGPT doesn't really have any knowledge of the context of where that NPC exists. So you ask it like, what are you doing? It's not really going to be able to give a good answer. But if you said, it looks like you're, you know, farming this field. how's it going? Then it'll be able to give like a legitimately reasonable conversation. So that's like that sort of content generation. I mean, basically anything where it would be cost prohibitive to use people, you could use AI for it. But I will throw out there, because I see some people kind of getting confused, the current AI models, which are large language models, or LLMs as they're called. I am by no means an expert in it, but I will say they are not sentient. Like, a lot of people kind of see what they're saying, like, wow, this thing understands stuff. But really all it's doing is, there's actually a paper by Google called Attention is All You Need. It's the foundational paper for most of what we're seeing now. But basically it looks through a sentence, and through training data tries to apply a weight to each word in the sentence. Like, how important is this word to the overall meaning of the sentence? It doesn't have any concept of that meaning, but it says like, oh, well, if this word is here and this word is here, then probabilistically, like, given all of my training data, the most likely words to respond to that would be this. So like, it's just basically, if you imagine like a cloud of data, it's kind of trying to find the most solid parts of that cloud and stick them together, and that's what it creates. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there too.
No, that's important. That, like, I don't want us to lose the importance of defining words. We've been doing that since the start of the call. We need to know what metaverse is and everything. So yeah,
I mean, it's amazing technology. I'm excited for it. I'm also kind of bored of it. Like, I'm not saying like it's like boring. Like, it's new technology, but like, I see it everywhere now. And at this point, I'm just like, just come take my job already. Like, Jesus, I'm not going to turn into a programmer. So just do whatever you're going to do. There's nothing I can do to stop it.
So let's touch on that as we end, right? Because you spoke about AI dealing with content moderation as well as content generation. I like that. You mentioned also that AI is touching on the jobs that are most human. And I laugh because that's a conversation I had today as well. The very jobs that we thought were going to be the last to go, the programmer, maybe the music producer, the artist, the legal professional, because ChatGPT is able to synthesize legal documents and give you recommendations that aren't all bad. These jobs that we thought were going to be the hardest to replace with robots are going first. And the safest jobs right now are the ones that deal most, like, they're technical, like plumbers or electricians. You have blue collar jobs where people are actually, working with electronics or your plumbing, or personal trainers. People still prefer to have someone come and say, you need to lose that body fat, or you need to, versus just having a robot saying you need to lose. It's not the same. But I found it interesting because the very jobs we thought were safest are actually the ones that are getting tackled first. So that was my that's my 2 cents on AI right now. It is either some jobs are going to be replaced, that is inevitable. Some persons are going to ride it well and become more productive than they've ever been. But we're also going to see a shift in the jobs that are necessary. I was just listening to a statistic that said that right now the percentage of workers that are doing farming in the US is at less than 2%. And that's down from a much higher number many years before. And it's not that less farming is going on. It's just that the very jobs that would have been used to do farming, like picking the oranges, etc., have now changed drastically. And I think we're about to see that as well.
Yeah, they're all automated. There's a really good article called Bullshit Jobs. If you Google it, you'll find it. But basically, it talks about how most of the labor done today is really not important. Like, a really good example is college education. Like, it's like 90% admin and like 10% actual teachers.
Whoa.
And so, like, I think AI is going to force people to, be more human, and they want to keep their job. Like, really, one thing I always kind of go to is like artists and even futurists, right? Almost all sci-fi universes I see have flying cars. And it's not because the artist or the designer or the thinker has thought, this is how these things are going to come about. They just know that flying cars through the other media they've consumed is what the future will have. They don't even think about it anymore. So these people where, ostensibly their job is to be uniquely human, uniquely creative, really they're just what a lot of what we do is just copies of copies, so much so that we've lost what the original even is. So like it's gonna kind of, I think, push some people to like have to actually up their creativity game. But on the other side,
a challenge. You're talking about a challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're gonna have to, like, if the AI can produce like art that looks really good, then you're gonna need to produce really good looking art of something completely new, because all the AI knows how to do is based on what it already exists. And I'm not even saying this is possible. I'm saying like this is what would have to happen.
Yeah.
But like, as much as also we can say like, oh, AI, it's going to create these jobs. Here's a challenge. We can try and fight it. Like this, we can't ignore the reality that like this is going to fundamentally change how we would live. And you brought up the point of farming and how, and I realize we're starting to go a little over time, so I'll be quick, or as quick as I can. But the agricultural revolution, the greatest thing that it did was basically we figured out a way how to turn oil into food, because through mechanized labor. So basically we took all the manual labor, we replaced it with oil-driven machines, and now we only need 2% of our workforce to actually do that work. And like that's a reality. So like all those people that would have been farmers went to work in factories. We're kind of entering the same sort of thing now, where like we cannot just say like, oh, it's like, because I know a lot of Silicon Valley stuff. It's like, oh, AI is going to create new jobs where you have to fix the AI and sort of thing. It's like, yeah, but if that was the same amount of jobs, then we wouldn't be using AI, because like,
right,
cost benefit.
Yep.
So we really have to figure out a new society. And I guess I'll sum up all of this by saying like, concept of the singularity, all that sort of thing. I personally think that the singularity where artificial intelligence, like true general intelligence, is actually a result of a singularity where you reach the technological level where you could create it, versus the singularity is when it's created. I see it as a result of a singularity, not the cause of one.
Okay.
But we're in that now, where we have basically all these pressures over the last, several centuries are all coming together. Climate degradation, human rights, artificial intelligence, mechanized labor, oil shortage. It's all kind of coming together now. So whatever we end up doing, I think, us as futurists, we have to be willing to like throw out everything, or at least reconsider everything, to be able to get to the better future that we need, that we want.
Well said. Well said. I like that.
Cool, man.
Okay, so we did a podcast.
Yeah, it's my first one.
First one. So there's no way to sum up everything that we discussed. I'm gonna put notes, like little chapter marks. But thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your discussion, and not just the discussion, because the discussion is always fun, but you brought a lot of insight, especially on the 3D design side, but also on points of view that we need to be aware of if this is going to be our future. How do we learn in the future? How do we interact in the future? How do we make it accessible to everyone? And then how do we ensure that accessibility is also regulated in a way that protects the people who are in the space? And
sure.
Yeah, this was good.
Yeah, man. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. This was fun. I hope we get to do it again, honestly.
All right. I'm going to hold you to that because it's on recording, but also I'm glad that
we got to talk about like gender issues in the virtual space next.
Oh, wow. All right. That sounds like a big discussion. So yeah, thank you. Sure. Thank you very much. And yeah, this was Chris. You're on In the Meta Space. The discussion was about digital twins, and it was with my twin, Jordan. As you can see, we're the exact same, everything down to our glasses.
Same wavelength.
And same thing. So I think that we had a really good discussion. So thank you, Jordan.
Cheers, man. Yeah. Well, whenever you hit the stop recording button, I want to ask you about